It was the last Saturday of September 1995, one of those Montana evenings that arrives carrying the first real cold of the season. The kind of cold that makes people pull on a sweater for the first time in months and feel something close to relief about it. A reminder that the world still turns and the seasons still come in order. Frank and Lorraine Hadley had been married for 25 years that night. A quarter century, their children had thrown them a party at the Elkhorn Steakhouse in Garnet Falls, Montana, and people who had known Frank and Lorraine since before their kids were born had driven 40 minutes from 2 different counties to sit at long tables and eat prime rib and tell the stories that accumulate around a marriage of 25 years. The funny ones and the hard ones, and the ones that are both at the same time. Their daughter Kira had made a cake with silver frosting. Their son Tate had given a toast that made his mother cry, and his father pretend the prime rib needed his full attention. By 9:30 that evening, Frank and Lorraine had said their goodbyes, gotten into Frank's pickup truck in the parking lot of the Elkhorn Steakhouse, and driven out of Garnet Falls toward the ranch on Route 12. Nobody ever saw them alive again. And for 27 years, the reason why lived inside a small fireproof safe bolted to the floor of the master bedroom closet of the Hadley Ranch. A safe whose combination only Frank had known, whose contents no one could access, and whose existence had been documented in the original case file and then, in the particular way that details get buried under the weight of an unsolved investigation, largely forgotten. In the spring of 2022, the safe was finally opened. And what was inside it explained everything. Garnet Falls, Montana sat at the edge of Powell County in a stretch of country that understood itself primarily in terms of distance. Distance to the nearest hospital, distance to the nearest hardware store, distance to the mountains that were visible on clear days from almost anywhere in town, and that made the distance feel like a gift rather than an inconvenience. Population 1,100, one main street with a post office, a bank, a diner called the Copper Kettle that had been serving the same breakfast since 1972, and a livestock auction barn that drew ranchers from 3 counties every other Thursday. People in Garnet Falls left their truck keys on the dashboard because it was easier than carrying them. They settled disputes by handshake and kept the handshake better than any document. Frank Hadley had run the Hadley Ranch, 2,400 acres of cattle country 12 miles east of town on Route 12, since his father had handed it to him in 1974. He was 52 years old in September of 1995, a man built for the work he did, who got up at 4:30 every morning out of habit so old it had become biology, who could fix a fence line in the dark and read weather in the color of a morning sky, and who could also, when the occasion demanded it, wear a sport coat and make conversation with anyone who sat next to him. He coached Little League for 11 years. He served 2 terms on the county water board. He had a dog named Sam, who was so old he moved more like a rug being slowly dragged than a living animal, and Frank carried him up the porch steps every evening because Sam's hips had given out 2 winters prior, and Frank had not once considered any alternative arrangement. Lorraine Hadley was 51, a former elementary school librarian who had left the job when Tate was born and had spent the years since managing the ranch's accounts, raising 2 children, tending a garden that took up most of the south yard, and serving as the unofficial institutional memory of Garnet Falls, the woman people called when they needed to know when something had happened, because Lorraine remembered dates and names and the particular texture of events the way other people remember the words to songs they learned as children. She had a Thursday afternoon reading group that had been meeting in her living room since 1988. She made the best apple butter in Powell County, which she stated as a fact rather than a boast, because it simply was. They had met in 1969 at a county fair, argued about something neither of them could later remember, and been together from that argument forward. 25 years. The silver anniversary. Their children had given the party and made the cake and given the toast, and Frank and Lorraine had driven home on a clear, cold September night with the mountains visible under a 3/4 moon. They never arrived. At 6:47 a.m. on Sunday, September 24th, 1995, Tate Hadley drove out to the ranch to drop off the leftover cake his mother had asked him to bring home for the ranch hands. He had stayed at his friend's place in town the previous night after the party. He turned onto the Route 12 approach and saw, a 1/4 mile from the ranch house, his father's pickup truck stopped in the middle of the gravel road with the driver's door open and the engine still running. He stopped his own truck. He got out. He walked to his father's pickup. Nobody inside. Both doors unlocked, the engine idling. The headlights still on, though daylight had long since overtaken them. On the passenger seat, Lorraine's good handbag, the one she only carried for occasions, and the card Tate had given them the night before, opened, still in its envelope. On the floor of the cab, one of Lorraine's shoes. One shoe, not both. Tate called the Powell County Sheriff's Office from the truck's CB radio at 6:53 a.m. He could not reach his sister. He sat in the gravel road between his truck and his father's and waited. Deputies arrived at 7:22 a.m. A search of the surrounding property and road corridor began by 8 a.m. By noon, it had expanded to include 22 volunteers and 2 tracking dogs. The dogs worked the road shoulder in both directions from the stopped truck. They indicated briefly in a shallow drainage ditch on the east side of the road, approximately 180 feet north of the stopped truck, and then lost the scent. No physical evidence of what had happened was found in that ditch. No blood. No sign of a struggle. No tracks beyond what the morning had already disturbed. Frank and Lorraine Hadley had stepped out of their truck on a gravel road they had driven 10,000 times and had not stepped back in, what the responding deputies noted, and what was entered into the Powell County case file by Sheriff's Detective Clara Sunde on September 25, 1995. Included one item documented and then not pursued for reasons that would frustrate the investigation for years. The ranch house had been entered. Not broken into, the back door had been opened with a key, and the only people who had keys were Frank, Lorraine, Tate, Kira, and the ranch foreman, a man named Webb Doucette. The kitchen had been searched. Drawers had been opened and not closed. A filing cabinet in Frank's office had been gone through, and in the master bedroom closet, the fireproof safe, which Frank had installed in 1991 and whose combination only he knew, showed scratches around the combination dial consistent with an attempt to open it by force. The attempt had not succeeded. The safe was documented, photographed, and then, as the investigation expanded outward looking for the Hadleys, and found nothing, it was left where it was, bolted to the floor. Locked, contents unknown. The investigation was assigned to Detective Clara Sunde of the Powell County Sheriff's Office, 38 years old, a 12-year veteran who had grown up in Powell County and who understood the Hadley Ranch and the Hadley family the way you understand people who are part of the fabric of the place you come from. She brought both the professional discipline and the personal knowledge to the case. And what she found in the first weeks was a wall on every side. No witnesses. The Route 12 corridor was empty at that hour on a Saturday night, and no one had driven the approach road between the Hadleys' departure from the Elk Horn and Tate's arrival the following morning. No physical evidence at the scene that pointed anywhere. No financial motive that could be confirmed. The ranch was solvent. The Hadleys had no known debts, no pending litigation. The ranch foreman, Webb Doucette, was interviewed 3 times. He had a key. He had been at the ranch house the previous afternoon for a routine conversation with Frank about fall cattle movement, had left at 4 p.m., and had spent the evening at home with his wife, who confirmed it. He was cooperative and visibly distressed. He was eliminated. The second line of inquiry led to a man named Gerald Forsyth, 44, who ran a neighboring property, 800 acres abutting the Hadley Ranch's northern fence line, and with whom Frank had been in a boundary dispute since 1993 over a section of fence line that each man believed the other was responsible for maintaining. Court documents confirmed the dispute had been active at the time of the disappearance and had included one formal complaint filed by Forsyth in August of 1995. Sunde interviewed Forsyth twice. His account of the evening of September 23rd was confirmed by a neighbor who had seen his truck at home past midnight. The boundary dispute, while genuine, showed no evidence of having escalated to violence. He was eliminated. The safe remained the one unanswered question Sunde returned to repeatedly. She noted in her case file that whoever had entered the ranch house knew the layout, had gone directly to Frank's office, and then the bedroom closet, without apparent searching of other rooms. She wrote, whoever came in knew what they were looking for. They expected to find it in that safe. She applied for a court order to have the safe professionally opened. The application was denied on the grounds that the safe's contents were the private property of persons not declared deceased, and that opening it without the owner's consent required a higher evidentiary bar than the current investigation had established. The safe stayed locked. Sunde stayed assigned. By 1998, Tate and Kira Hadley had taken over management of the ranch under a joint legal arrangement supervised by the county. Kira had moved into the ranch house. She left her parents' bedroom untouched. She did not touch the closet. She did not touch the safe. The years on a Montana ranch do not pass quietly. They pass in the specific loud language of weather and cattle and broken equipment in seasons that do not negotiate. Tate was 31 in 1998 and running the cattle operation. Kira was 28 and managing the accounts in the house the way her mother had, with a competence that cost her something every day because it required her to inhabit a life that had been built for someone else. By 2002, 7 years had passed. Detective Sunde had applied twice more for court orders to open the safe, citing new case review protocols. Both applications had been denied. The Hadleys had not been declared deceased. The safe remained their property. By 2007, 12 years had passed. The Thursday afternoon reading group that Lorraine had hosted since 1988 continued to meet at the ranch house. Kira had kept it going, the same women, the same living room. Because her mother had started it, and because some things should not be allowed to end just because the person who started them is gone. The women brought their books and sat in Lorraine's chairs and talked about what they were reading, and sometimes they talked about Lorraine, and sometimes they didn't. And both were all right. By 2015, 20 years had passed. Clara Sunde had retired from the Powell County Sheriff's Office in 2012, but had not retired from the Hadley case. She had taken the file home in the same way she had taken everything she had ever left unfinished, not as a defeat, but as an ongoing obligation. She kept it in her study. She reviewed it when new forensic protocols were announced, and when they weren't, she sent letters to the case's current assigned detective every January, reminding him that the safe had not been opened. In 2019, Frank and Lorraine Hadley were formally declared deceased by a Powell County court at Tate and Kira's petition. They had been missing for 24 years. The legal declaration changed the ownership of the safe. Its contents were now the property of the estate, which meant Tate and Kira had the legal standing to open it. Kira had the safe's manufacturer traced through serial number records. She hired a certified locksmith. She scheduled a date. she could not make herself go through with it for 3 years. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, verifying facts, and piecing together lives that deserved better. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, please take a second to like this video, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your support is what makes this possible. Now, let's get back to Frank and Lorraine. On a Tuesday morning in March 2022, Tate and Kira Hadley stood in the closet of their parents' bedroom with a licensed locksmith named Dale Pruitt and the current Powell County cold case detective, a man named Sergeant James Rourke, 41 years old, who had grown up in Garnet Falls and had known the Hadley children from childhood, and who had reviewed the case file the previous year, and who had read Clara Sundi's notations about the safe so many times he could recite them from memory. The locksmith worked the dial for 11 minutes. The safe opened. Inside the safe were 3 items: an envelope containing Frank and Lorraine's original marriage certificate, dated September 22, 1970. A smaller envelope containing $11,000 in cash, and a third envelope, sealed, with Frank's handwriting on the front, for Tate and Kira. Read if something happens to us. Rourke photographed everything before anything was touched. Then he looked at Tate and Kira. Kira opened the third envelope. Frank had written 4 pages in longhand, dated August 14, 1995, 6 weeks before his anniversary, 7 weeks before he disappeared. He had written it because he had become afraid, and because he was the kind of man who prepared for things rather than hoping they wouldn't happen. He wrote that he had discovered, in the summer of 1995, that a man named Denton Marsh, a cattle broker who had done business with the Hadley Ranch for 11 years, and who was known throughout Powell County as a reliable and well-regarded operator, had been systematically defrauding 3 area ranches, including the Hadleys, through a scheme involving falsified livestock weights and double-billed shipping invoices. Frank had calculated the losses to his own operation at $47,000 over 4 years. He had confronted Marsh privately in July of 1995 and given him 30 days to make restitution before Frank took it to the county attorney. Marsh had not made restitution. Frank had a meeting scheduled with the county attorney for October 2, 1995. He had not made it to October 2nd. Frank had written, in the final paragraph of the letter, "I don't know if anything will come of this. Denton Marsh is not a man I would have thought capable of anything beyond theft. But I have been wrong about men before. If something happens to Lorraine and me before October 2nd, this is where you start." Rourke called Clara Sundi at her home that afternoon. She had been waiting 27 years for this call. She drove to the sheriff's office from her house in 40 minutes and sat at a conference table and read Frank's 4 pages 3 times. Then she said, "I knew it was in that safe. I always knew it was in that safe." Denton Marsh was 73 years old in March of 2022. He was still operating in the county, semi-retired, living on a property outside Garnet Falls. He had continued doing business in Powell County for 27 years after the night Frank and Lorraine Hadley had stopped coming home. He had attended their memorial service in 2000. He had expressed condolences to Tate and Kira. He had done all of this with the particular composure of a man who had calculated, correctly, that no one would ever open that safe. He had calculated wrong by 27 years. The investigation that followed Frank's letter was swift by the standards of cold cases. Forensic accountants, working from Frank's original calculations and reconstructed business records, confirmed the fraud scheme and expanded it. Marsh had defrauded 6 ranches, not 3, over a period of 14 years, for total losses exceeding $340,000. Phone records from 1995, preserved in archived carrier documentation, placed 2 calls between Marsh's business line and a number registered to a man named Carl Bird, a former ranch hand with a prior conviction for assault. In the week following Frank's confrontation of Marsh in July of 1995, and 3 more calls in the 48 hours before the Hadleys' disappearance. Carl Bird had died in 2011. He could not be charged. But his connection to Marsh, established through the phone records, the fraud evidence, and a statement from a surviving former associate who had known both men and came forward after the arrest was announced, provided the prosecutorial thread that the Powell County Attorney's Office used to construct the case. Denton Marsh was arrested at his property outside Garnet Falls on June 8, 2022. He was in the yard when the patrol cars came up the drive, doing something ordinary, checking a fence post, hands in his coat pockets. The mountains visible behind him, the same way they had always been. He looked at Sergeant Rourke. He looked at the warrant. He said nothing. He was 73 years old and had spent 27 years in the same county as the children of the people he had killed, had watched them grow into the stewards of their parents' land, had maybe even told himself at some point that the worst was behind him and that silence was the same thing as safety. He learned on a Tuesday morning in March 2022 that it was not. The Garnet Falls community's response to his arrest was not the stunned silence of a community that had not suspected. It was the particular grief of a community that had suspected and had not been able to name it, and that now had the name and did not know quite what to do with the relief. Tate Hadley, when a reporter from the Powell County paper reached him for comment, said, "My father always said the truth is patient. He said it because he believed it. He was right. He just didn't get to see it." Denton Marsh entered a plea of guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder in January of 2023, avoiding trial. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. He made no statement at sentencing. Frank Hadley was 52 years old on the night of September 23, 1995. When he drove his wife home from the party their children had thrown them, and did not make it to the end of their own driveway. He had written a letter 6 weeks before and put it in a safe because he was the kind of man who prepared for things. He had coached Little League for 11 years. He carried his dog up the porch steps every evening because Sam's hips had given out, and there was no other arrangement Frank was willing to consider. Lorraine Hadley was 51, and she remembered the dates and textures of things, and she made the best apple butter in Powell County. And she had kept a Thursday reading group going in her living room since 1988, because she believed that people who read together stay connected to each other in ways that are worth protecting. Her daughter kept that reading group going for 27 years after she disappeared, in the same living room, in the same chairs. It is still meeting. The ranch on Route 12 is still operating. Tate and Kira run it together. The south yard garden that Lorraine planted is still there, though it has changed over the years in the way gardens change when the person who designed them is gone, and the people who tend them are doing it out of love rather than original vision. It is still a garden. That is enough. The safe is still in the closet. Does the fact that Frank Hadley wrote that letter and put it in that safe, that he prepared for the possibility of his own death with the same practicality he brought to a fence line or a cattle rotation, change the way you feel about what happened to him? What do you think it means that Denton Marsh attended the Hadleys' memorial service in 2000 and expressed condolences to their children? And what does it tell us about the particular kind of evil that can do that? And do you believe that the 27-year gap between Frank's letter and its being read was justice delayed, or something for which there is no adequate word? Leave your thoughts below. Frank and Lorraine Hadley earned this conversation. Justice found Frank and Lorraine after 27 years. Stories like theirs are why this channel exists. If you believe truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.